What an amazing God we serve. It is such a blessing to be here with you today for us to sing together and sing praises to his name. And we are reminded of his strength in many ways. And one of those is seeing or hearing the news of Henry Jones getting to go home. And we see God at work in that moment and healing and sustaining and giving us strength. We're also in prayer for Kevin Moore. We want to encourage you to continue to pray for him. His surgery is coming up on Tuesday. So be sure that you are in earnest prayer for him, that the Lord would watch over the doctors and nurses taking care of him so he can be returned to his strength and he can feel even better than when he went in for surgery. So we're certainly mindful for each of them and everyone among us that is going through difficulties and challenges in your life right now. We hope you can see and feel the presence of the Lord, because we do trust that he is strong even in our weakest moments. And one way we see that show up in real time in our culture was back in the year of 1992. You may remember the Olympics that summer were in Barcelona. There was one sprinter from Great Britain. His name is Derek Redmond. He was a favorite to win the 400-meter dash, and here is the race as it plays out. You can see him there in blue, and as he rounded the back stretch of his semifinal heat, suddenly his hamstring tore. He collapsed on the track. He was clutching his leg in agony, and his Olympic dream was over. But then something amazing happened. You can see he gets up and continues the race. This amazing moment where everyone took notice as he hobbled down the track. Then from the crowd, this man broke through security. It was his father, Jim Redmond. Jim rushed to his son. He wrapped his arm around him, as you can see there. And it said that he said, "You don't have to do this." To which Derek responded, "Yes, I do." His father said they were going to finish this together. With tens of thousands watching, the father and son made their way to the finish line together. The crowd erupted, not because Derek won the race, but because he finished the race. He finished with help. And I think this moment illustrates something very powerful in our lives. That even when we're down on our luck, even when things seem to be going the opposite way of which we want, specifically in those moments, we can see, we can feel God show up in our lives. And perhaps in those moments is when we truly find our faith. We oftentimes in our culture today admire strength, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual. But I believe sometimes our greatest strength shows up in our weakest moments, when we stop pretending that we can do it alone and we start trusting the one who will deliver us through over and over again. And sometimes you need to be reminded that it's not about you. You need to be reminded that your strength is not enough, that we do, in fact, need our Lord to carry us to the finish line over and over again in our lives. That's what today's message is all about. It's the final message in our kingdom paradoxes as we take a look at the upside down world, the upside down kingdom that Jesus brought into the world and taught us the right way to live. That we don't look at what our culture tells us is wise. Instead, we trust God who has a different plan, God who has a different path set out for each and every one of us. If you have your Bibles, open them up to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. That's where we find the text of today's message. This is where Paul shows us that weakness isn't a problem. Instead, it's a platform for God's power. We'll pick up in verse 7 of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and we'll read through verse 10. There it says, "So to keep me from being conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from being conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Think about the power behind those words and what it means for each of us today. When I am weak, then I am strong. You may have heard a lesson or two about this text over the years as we look at the reality of what weakness really is. Paul's thorn in the flesh, he says in verse 7, therefore, in order to keep me from being conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh. He calls it a messenger of Satan to torment me. You may have heard before, we don't know exactly what that thorn was, whether it was something physical. Others say it's emotional or spiritual, perhaps. But we know whatever it was, it hurt. Whatever it was ongoing in his life. And he pleaded with God. He says, I pleaded 3 times that he remove this from me, that he take it away. But what was God's answer? He didn't take it away. He did not remove it. But instead, he offers his grace. Do you catch that? In verse 8, it says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it from me. But what we see in the text, that God did not remove the thorn. And it wasn't because he didn't care. Instead, it was because he had something better in mind. You know what that better thing was? He says it in the text, grace. Amazing grace he offers to Paul in this moment. And one thing I want you to notice as we get started in this lesson here this morning, if you're using your outlines, weakness is not failure. Oftentimes, it is a doorway. It leads us to something. Weakness is not something we look at and we're miserable because, but instead we find that opportunity to put our trust in him. And as we do, it's a doorway to something better. The world tells us to refuse weakness, to avoid weakness at all costs, but Scriptures tells us that weakness is not a sign of failure. Instead, it's a doorway to something deeper. It's a doorway to dependence upon God. It's the place where God can step in and truly reveal his power and not yours. Do you see that? It's not about you. That's the whole point behind today's message, is to recognize where true power lies, where true power lives, and it's not within you, but it's within him. And so in this, God did not remove the thorn. Instead, he provided grace. The world tells us to avoid weakness. God steps in these moments. There's an old saying you may have heard, broken crayons still color. Yesterday we went to Huntsville with some of our young people. Kennedy had some colors that she ordered a kid's meal while we were there, and she was using those colors before the meal came, and Dylan reached to grab one and broke that crayon. But guess what? She was still able to use that crayon, wasn't she? You could still use a broken crayon. In fact, now not only did she have one crayon, now there were 2. They could both use a crayon as a result. And sometimes we look at a broken situation and we think how terrible this is. But isn't that an opportunity? Broken crayons give us a moment to share. Broken situations in our lives help us to realize other things are available and put our strength and trust in him. A broken crayon may not look useful, but the truth is it still has purpose. Sometimes when it's broken, you can share it. 2 people can use it now, and maybe your thorn is a reminder that you were never meant to live self-sufficiently. You see it? Sometimes it's a reminder that it's not about you. You were meant to live grace-dependent. So weakness is real. What do we do with it? Where do we go? I think we need to recognize the sufficiency of God's grace. You hear that? The sufficiency of God's grace. In the text, he says, my grace is sufficient for you. After Paul is pleading for this thorn to be removed from him, God answers not with healing, but with a promise. He says, Paul, I'm not taking this from you, but I'm giving you something better. I'm giving you me, and my grace is enough. And think about that scenario. He's pleading for something, but God says, no, I'm going to give you something better. I'm going to give you myself. What an incredible gift that he offers in his grace, because his grace is enough. So let's break this down. This might be the most important truth that some of us need to hear today. God doesn't say, I'll give you grace if things get really bad. He says, my grace is sufficient. It's present tense in this moment. He doesn't say when things get tough, then come. No, he says, my grace is sufficient for you. Live in it right now. Live in it always. The word sufficient means complete, full. It means it's more than enough. In other words, God is saying, what you're facing is real, but my grace will match it. My grace will carry you through. It will sustain you in this moment, and it will outlast any situation that may arise in your life. Do you hear that? He says, my grace will outlast any difficult situation, any challenge, any struggle that you're facing. God is enough to overcome it. God offers you enough to last throughout it. We may not realize that here on this earth, but I promise you there's a place coming, there's a time coming, if you keep your faith and trust in him, that will live far beyond your brief moment here on earth. And if we trust him, he has a home waiting for each of us, because his grace is sufficient to carry us through. See it? God doesn't say, I'll give you grace if things get really bad. He says, live in it right now. Trust me. Know that my grace is sufficient. Think of it this way. If you're drowning in 5 feet of water, God doesn't give you 4 feet of grace. No, instead, he steps in and offers an entire ocean. He hands it all over to you, and he lifts you up in the meantime. God's grace meets us where we are, not where we wish we could be. And I think this is important. So think about this, because many of us think we have to reach a certain level of strength. We have to reach a certain level of performance. We have to reach a certain level of faith before God steps in. But notice, Paul didn't say, I became strong, so God helped me. He says, when I am weak, God steps in. So I want you to see that, recognize that in your lives. Run to him, even in your darkest moments, because that's when he shows up the biggest. He was still weak. Paul was still struggling, still pleading. And that's exactly the time where God met him in this moment. You see, grace isn't for people that have it all together. I would argue that nobody in this room has it all together. Are you with me on that? We got to all have a little work to do. We all have moments in our lives and in situations where we still struggle. We all have sin that creeps in from time to time. We all need him. We all need his grace. What an amazing promise it is to know that even in those moments, he is right there for me. I don't have to climb my way out to reach him. No, he shows up in the pit and picks us up. I don't have to reach a certain level before he steps in. No, he's going to be right there with me, walking side by side, climbing side by side, pulling me up. In fact, he doesn't even allow us to do the climbing. He's the one that lifted us up on that cross. He says, even though you were dead in your sin, I have a plan for you. And through Jesus Christ, you are saved, not because you made it out, but because Jesus took your sins with him on that cross. And when you are weak, you can find strength in him. In fact, that's when it is fully realized in our lives. So grace isn't for people who have it all together. No, it's for you and for me, those that are still struggling, those that are still hurting, those who are going through challenges. Maybe you've thought in your life before, maybe if I were a little bit more faithful, I wouldn't struggle like this. If I were a little strong, then maybe God would use me. If I prayed more, this wouldn't be happening to me. But God isn't waiting for a version of you that has it all figured out. Do you hear that? God isn't waiting for a version of you that has it all figured out before he moves in and offers his grace. He's showing up for this version of you, offering to help you. He's showing up in this moment to bring you to something greater, to carry you through. This version of you that may be barely hanging on, God is right there, standing with us, walking with us with every step. You see, we are sustained by grace, not by self-sufficiency, if you use your outlines this morning. We are sustained by grace, God's grace. This is the heart of the Christian life, isn't it? This is what it means to be a Christian. Remember, Christian without Christ, 3 letters, I-A-N, which stands for what? You can say it? Anybody? Say it loud. I ain't nothing. A Christian without Christ, I ain't nothing. We need to recognize that. That's what it means to be a Christian. And without Jesus, we're left to self-sufficiency, which is going to let us down over and over again. So we, as a Christian, are sustained by grace, and it's only because of Jesus that we're here right now. It's only because of Jesus that we have hope. It's only because of Jesus that we have a home for eternity. Because left to our own, we've all messed it up. Left to our own, we've all fallen short. So this is the heart of the Christian life. We're not held up by our own strength. We are carried by His grace. You may look at someone and you may think, they're so strong, I wish I had faith like that, but I guarantee you, if you sat down and have a conversation with them, they'll tell you about a moment that Jesus really showed up. They may even admit to you that even in this moment, it's not me, but it's God's grace that's carrying me. It's God's grace that is keeping me upright and pulling me through. Self-sufficiency is exhausting. But God's grace is resting in the power of someone and something greater than yourself. See it? Not about you. It's about trusting in Him who created you. It's about trusting in Him who created everything around us and trusting in His plan, trusting in His grace. Think about the Israelites in the wilderness. You remember when they were making their way through and they were hungry, didn't have anything to eat. But God didn't give them a 40-year supply of food, did He? No, He gave them manna for each day. He offered just enough. There was no storing or it would go bad. There was no hoarding. There was no self-sufficiency. No, there was just daily dependence on God. And I believe that's the way grace works in our lives today. You may not feel strong enough for the whole journey, and that's okay, because God will give you enough food for today. God will sustain you. You may have heard the saying, one step at a time. I'm going to walk through this life making one step at a time because God is going to direct each step. We don't have to know the full plan. And the truth is we don't know it. Life is going to throw us some curveballs. But if we keep our faith in Him, stepping one step at a time, then we'll find that His grace is enough. Just as He offered the Israelites manna for each day. When tomorrow comes, guess what? He's going to meet you there as well. We're just going to get through today, and God's going to be there tomorrow. So, we've seen the reality of weakness. Now we know that God's grace is more than enough for us. But how exactly does God work in our weakness? What does that look like? How do we live that out? Well, I think we find it through the power of Jesus Christ. In verse 9 in our text, He says, "For my power is made perfect in weakness." God doesn't just say, "My grace is sufficient." No, He adds something even deeper here. He says, "My power is made perfect in weakness." Let that sink in. The place where we feel the weakest is the place where God's power shows up. Do you see it? When you feel the weakest is when you feel His presence the most. So shouldn't that encourage us to feel weak? Shouldn't that encourage us to embrace these moments? Because it's in those moments, in our weakest moments, when we feel His presence the most. We're truly leaning into Him, truly trusting Him, and allowing His grace to work in our lives. This isn't just comfort. It's a shift in perspective. It's changing the way we think about every moment of our lives. It's not, I'm weak, so I'm broken. Instead, it's I'm weak, so God has room to work. This allows God to step in and make some changes. You got to admit you got a problem before you can allow him to come in and fix it. We're sitting here thinking that I got it all together, then you're not going to lean on his grace and his love to change you. But it's about coming to him and recognize his way is better. So how do we get there, Lord? And we go to him in prayer. We trust him. And as we do, he begins to transform us to the life that we ought to be living. The word perfect here doesn't mean flawless. It means complete. It means fully revealed, fully expressed. God is saying, when you reach the end of your rope, that's where my power begins to shine. And so, in other words, our weakness doesn't block God's power. Instead, it sets the stage for it. It sets it up to work in our lives. Think about it. If you're strong, people may credit your success to you. But when you're clearly in over your head and things still move forward, people look at you and say, well, that must be God at work. There's no way that guy could have done that. There's no way they could accomplish that. So it must be God at work. And that's what he desires from us, even in our weakness. God uses the humble. He uses the broken. He uses the dependent. He always has. Those that need him are the ones that show up for him over and over again because they recognize where the true power comes from. Moses came to God and says, I can't even talk. And God says, I'm going to use your voice to lead my people out of bondage. We see Gideon. Do you remember this story? And I think sometimes we miss this as we fly through the story. But Gideon is hiding out in a wine press. It's this small little area where they typically would put the grapes in and they would stomp them around. Gideon is laying down. He's hiding in here, trying where no one can find him. And the angel of the Lord comes to him and he says, "Oh, mighty warrior, what are you talking about? You're sitting there hiding in a wine press and he's calling me a mighty warrior? What are you talking about?" But it was in that moment where Gideon allowed God to go to work because it was in his weakest moment. And he sees something in us, an openness, a need in our lives where he can step in and we can see his power. It's not our own. Gideon says, I'm the weakest of my clan, and my clan is the weakest among your people. Why are you coming after me? And God says, that's exactly where I do my best work. David's dad didn't even bring him out for the lineup when they're choosing the king. You know this story? He's off doing his work as a shepherd in the field. He didn't even have time to come in for the lineup. But that's who God chose to lead his people, to be a great and mighty king, perhaps the greatest king in history. And God chose him, the lowly shepherd working out in the field. It's the same grace he offers to each and every one of us. Not even Jesus Christ was crucified in weakness so that true power could come on the other side. He was crucified in weakness, yet he was raised to power. 2 Corinthians 13:4. See, God is not impressed by human strength. Instead, he's drawn to surrendered hearts. You see that? It's not about your strength, it's about your surrender. He doesn't ask for your resume, he simply asks for your obedience. And when we are when we are weak, he is strong in us. Have to be willing to let him in. Paul summarizes this whole point in verse 10. When I am weak, then I am strong. It sounds upside down. It sounds like a paradox of Christian life. The weaker I get, the stronger he becomes in me. The more I surrender, the more I experience his power. The less I trust in me, the more I depend on him. But that's exactly the way it works for us as Christians, and I want you to see that. I want you to live that in your lives. Hold on to him. Trust him. Because it's only in him that we find strength. That's exactly how God's power works. It doesn't press through the tough, polished areas of our lives. It flows through the cracks, the places we'd rather hide, the wounds we wish we didn't have. You ever had a leak in one of your pipes? Whenever the plumber comes over to take a look, or maybe you try to do it yourself, and he's looking at that pipe, and there's this one little crack in the middle, does the plumber say, oh, the pipe is great, there's just this one little spot, so I think you should keep that? No, he focuses on the part that's broken. And that has to be healed. That has to be restored before the pipe is any good. And it's in those moments we find what true strength is. Your brokenness. That's where grace flows fastest. If you want to find God showing up in your life, look at the places where you're the best. You don't need to fix it all before God can use you. That's the good news. Sometimes we delay stepping out in faith because we think I'm not ready. We think I'm still too messed up. I'm not strong enough. But that's exactly why God wants to use you. Because you are broken, because you are falling short, because you are not strong enough. Because when others see what God is doing through your weakness, then they know it's not about you, it's all about Him. So, as we conclude this morning, what should our response be to all of this? I think Paul shows us exactly what to do in verses 9 and 10. He says, I will boast all the more gladly because my weakness. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in my weaknesses, because I recognize that's where God is. Now, we reach the point where it sounds completely upside down, right? I boast in it. He says, I delight in my weaknesses, not in his victories, not in his strengths, but in his struggles. He says in his insults, in his hardships and persecutions and difficulties. Why? Because he's learned something radical. Weakness is no longer something to hide. Instead, it's something to celebrate, because in it, we reveal the power of Christ. This is not some fake spiritual positivity. This isn't Paul saying, I enjoy being miserable. No, instead, he is saying, I rejoice because weakness puts me right where I belong, right at the feet of Jesus. He's not praising pain. Instead, he's praising the presence of God in the pain. Do you see it? It's not about enjoying those circumstances, but it's about trusting God in them and seeing Him fully revealed in our lives because of our weakness. This isn't just endurance. No, this is purpose for us. Let's be honest, this is the opposite of what the world thinks. The world says, be strong, cover your flaws, never let anyone see you struggle. You may have heard these words before. Project confidence, even if it's fake. But Paul says, let me struggle. Let them see me struggle, because that's when they'll really see Christ working in my life. The gospel turns weakness into a witness. When you walk through pain with faith, people begin to notice, and they may ask questions, something like, how are you still standing? And that gives us an opportunity to point to Him, point to the only real source of strength in our lives. You get to say, I'm not strong, He's just carrying me through it. So weakness becomes worship when it points to the power of God. Outlines, weakness becomes worship when it points to God's power. This is the goal of Christian life, not to look strong, but to make Jesus look strong. Your weakness isn't a liability. No, it's a platform for Him. And when Paul boasts in his weakness, he's saying, look what God can do with somebody like me. I think that often. God chose me to proclaim His word, and I look back at all the mistakes, all the ways that I've fallen short. But God still says, it's not about you. It's about my message. It's not about your strength and your goodness, but about my grace. That's the way it works for each and every one of us. It's not about you. It's about Him being proclaimed in the way you lived your life and the way you live. Look what God can do even with someone like me. That's worship. When we stop hiding our thorns and start pointing to God's grace, and our lives become a testimony. There's an old parable about a man who carried water in 2 clay pots. One was whole, the other was cracked. The cracked pot was ashamed, and it looked up at the man and says, I'm broken, I leak, I'm useless. The man replied, "Don't you see? I planted seeds on your side of the path. Every day as you leaked, you watered those plants. Now there's a trail of beautiful flowers because of you." Brothers and sisters, I want you to see this morning, your weakness might be the very thing that God is using to water someone else's plants. You see that? You may be struggling, you may be hurting, you may be in need. Maybe that's the very thing that someone else needs in their life. Through you, His love is on display. Through you, His grace is abundant and overflowing. God doesn't ask us to be strong. He asks us surrendered. His grace is enough. His power shows up best when you don't have it all together, when you finally admit that you don't. Let God's grace meet you in the thorn. Let His power shine in your struggle, and let your weakness be your worship. I want to take you back to the opening thought as we watch that video of Derek Redmond fall on his knees on an Olympic track. You notice he didn't finish that race alone. Instead, his father came down, wrapped his arms around him, and carried him to the finish line. What I want you to see is each and every one of us are exactly like Derek. We need help to make it to the finish line. You've fallen. You're incomplete. You can't do it by yourself. Only the power of Jesus that brings us to the finish line. And until you're ready to accept that, until you're ready to find strength in your weakness, you're never going to make it. It's only Jesus Christ. It's only His blood that restores us. It's only His love that makes us whole. Have you allowed His blood to work in your life? Have you given yourself to Him? Have you been buried in that watery grave of baptism and raised up to walk a new life because you've encountered His blood that washed you clean? If you've never made that step, we want you to do that this morning. Recognize that you're lying there on the track and the finish line is right there before you, and the only way to get there is for Jesus to step in. Perhaps you've made that choice, but you've let other things, other distractions in this world pull you away. It's time to come back to Him. It's time to rededicate your life to Him. If you need to make that choice today, if you need to recognize the weakness in your life and trust in His power, please come. We can help you in any way. If you need the prayers of the congregation, if you need to give yourself to Him in baptism, please come. As together we stand and sing.